Hey readers, welcome back to another review. Today's book is very fun and I really enjoyed reading it. And I also love the design of the book itself. This is Haiku Illustrated. The translation was done by Hart, Larrabee. Um, I think out of all the books that I'm reviewing this year, this one has the coolest physical design of the book because it's this is like cloth kind of, um, and then it's bound with actual cord going through. And it's also interesting because the pages themselves are very thick. They're like double, so they actually like you can sort of separate them at the top, but it's one page, which is kind of interesting. But I really enjoyed this book, and I love it visually, and I loved it just to read as well. Also, this design is very pretty as well. But I thought this was very, very fun because it starts off with actually talking about the history of what haiku are and sort of where they came from and how they've evolved over time. And then it also talks about each of the individual poets who are represented in the book, which I thought was kind of interesting because that way, when you're reading it at the top of the page, it says who it was that wrote that one. And so you get a little bit of background on the actual people. But another thing that I really enjoyed is I have studied some Japanese in high school and college, and I'm not fluent at reading or speaking, but I would say I'm like semi fluent at speaking. But what I think is very cool is they have the original Japanese, the phonetic Japanese, and then an English translation. And then what they did say at the beginning is for the English translation, they did not try to keep the rhythm of what a haiku should be because they're trying to preserve the meaning more than the actual structure. But all of the art is really beautiful. I think it's very fun how some are slightly more simplistic, but some are very detailed and colorful. There's one particular poem that I really enjoyed and told my mom about, and she thought was very funny too, where the translation is basically spiders in the corners, fear not, I won't be dusting, which we thought was very, very funny. It's also really interesting how some of them are. Here it is, that one. The spiders in the corners one. But we thought it was really fun to just, when I was talking to her, some of the things are very beautiful, like observations about nature and petals and animals and spring coming and winter coming or leaving and things like that. And then some get very existential, which I think is kind of interesting because I think it kind of reflects on the poets themselves, which you can kind of see when you read about them. What I also found interesting is there are two that are very similar, and like they both include an insect on the temple bell or something like that, if I remember correctly. And I think that the person who wrote the second one sort of idolized the one who wrote the first one, which I think is interesting because I wonder if that one was inspired by the other one. But it's such a cool book, and I think it's also a really interesting insight into Japanese culture and sort of the way a lot of these are noticing very tiny details in nature or some of them do get more existential, but a lot of them are very, like, noticing something about a season on a mountain or something like that. And I feel like it's, from my understanding, very representative of how in Japanese culture nature is extremely important. And I think they do a really beautiful job of capturing that in the way that they are writing it, or at least how the translation is making it seem like they are conveying that. And I think the translations, even though they're not trying to necessarily keep the rhythm, they still write it in 3 lines, which is actually not traditional in Japanese. They just write it as one long line, and then it's based on the rhythm of the words that you can figure out the syllables of, like, the 5-7-5 that haiku are supposed to be. But in both the phonetic one and then the translation, they do write it in 3 lines, but sometimes the English ones are not matching the syllables. They're just still in the same format. But I do really love it. I think I read it all in like an hour. It looks very thick, but because the pages are double and also there's only about this much text on each page, it can be read very, very quickly. But also I loved going back through and just looking at all of the artwork, because I feel like there are so many different styles and they're all so beautiful and just very worthwhile to go look at for a while. But this one, I did find one of the more sort of morbid existential ones, which is, of its approaching death, the cicada speaks not a word. So there is the cicada. But there's some that are very much more like Fuji alone floats above a sea of new leaves, which is more just relaxing nature and not existential anything. But I love all of it. I think it's so cool. This image on the cover actually goes with one of the poems inside, which is all that remains is the break of dawn in white plum blossoms. But then you have like this completely different stylistic drawing and just so much variety, and I love it. And even the content of the poems themselves are very different. Another very different style of art. Especially when compared to something like this. But I really, really enjoyed it, and I feel like there's not as much to say in this review because it is poetry, which is, like, a bit harder to discuss plot and characters and stuff. But I did really, really enjoy it, and I think this is also a great book to give as a gift. I actually just got a copy for my aunt for her retirement party, and she really loved it. So I think that's pretty fun as well. And it's a good coffee table book too, because it looks amazing, and also you can have it out, someone can pick it up and read a few or skim through or just look at the art without getting stuck wanting a full plot. Like, I know some people will pick up a book and then not want to put it down because it has a plot. But this, if you have, like, someone over and you're like, I'll just put this out on the coffee table, they can pick it up and look at it. But also, it's a quick read, and it's also not something where they won't be able to put it down because it isn't a connecting plot, because it's all just poems. But I really enjoyed it, and it was also interesting learning about the history of the people who wrote them, because in several other classes I've taken in literature or my Japanese classes, we've actually looked at certain ones that are in here, or we talked about basho the one of the poets in here. But it's really interesting to read what this is saying about their lives, and also just the history of haiku and how it became the art form that it is today, because it apparently used to be basically the intro to longer things, and then at one point it shifted to kind of be its own separate thing where it's not leading into a longer thing now. It just is the short form thing now. So I think that's really interesting as part of the history of that, because I didn't know that. I thought it had always been the short form thing. This is another really beautiful page. But yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. And I think it was fun for me, knowing some Japanese, to try and read what I could of the hiragana, katakana, kanji part, and then also try and like match up the words that I knew in the romaji part, but then also the translation. So it was really fun for that reason too. And I think it's just a great book in general for people who like fun illustrated books, for people who like poetry, for people who like Japanese culture. It's all really, really good. But I think I've said most of what I wanted to about it. Again, poetry reviews are usually shorter because there's just less to say about plot and characters and everything, but I highly recommend it. And again, it is just such a beautiful book, and I love the way they designed all of it. But with that being said, if you haven't yet, please subscribe if you made it this far. I am trying to reach a specific goal by the end of the year, so every single subscriber really helps me out. And let me know how your reading list is going, or what you've been reading and enjoying recently. And keep reading. Bye!